They thought they had an easy target, a quiet old man on a bus. What they didn't realize was that he was a seasoned Vietnam veteran, carrying lessons they would never forget. It was just another day on the 5:15 bus heading toward downtown Baltimore. The air inside was stuffy, filled with commuters eager to get home. Conversations hummed softly, interrupted by the occasional screech of the bus's brakes. Up near the front, an elderly black man took his seat, his hands rough and weathered, resting on a cane that seemed to have lived as long as he had. His clothes were simple, a worn jacket and neatly pressed pants, showing he valued dignity over showiness. At first, no one paid him much attention. He was the kind of figure you'd glance at and forget, but his posture said otherwise. He sat tall, his gaze steady as if the weight of the world couldn't bend him. Yet the faint crease on his brow told of a life that had seen its fair share of struggles. 3 seats back, a group of teenagers climbed aboard, their laughter sharp and loud, moving with that carefree energy of youth. They scanned the bus for their next bit of fun. One of them, a tall boy in a bright red hoodie, spotted the old man. His eyes lit up, not with respect, but mischief. He nudged his friends and whispered something that sent them all into fits of laughter. The man, however, remained unmoved, staring out the window as the city passed by. If he heard their whispers, he didn't show it, but the teens were not satisfied with just muttering. They wanted a reaction. "Hey, old man," the boy in red called out, his voice loud enough to cut through the bus's hum. "Lose your walker or something? Bet you're waiting for someone to carry you home, huh?" A wave of discomfort passed through the bus, and some passengers glanced at the teens, others at the old man. Most, however, kept their heads down, pretending not to notice. The elderly man shifted slightly in his seat, but didn't respond. His eyes stayed fixed on the world outside the window. The boy in red, emboldened by the silence, stood up, swaying slightly as the bus hit a bump. "What's wrong, Cat?" "Got your tongue, Grandpa," he sneered. The old man's fingers tightened ever so slightly around his cane, but his face remained calm. A flicker of something, patience maybe, passed through his eyes. He turned his head slowly, just enough to meet the boy's gaze, and in that instant, everything changed. There was no anger, no fear, just a quiet strength that seemed to settle the air around him. The boy hesitated for half a second, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. The bus continued its rattle, passengers tense and silent, waiting for something to unfold. Little did they know, the old man's silence was not a sign of weakness, but a choice that would soon shift everything. The teenagers' laughter grew louder, echoing throughout the bus, demanding attention. The boy in red leaned in closer, his voice dripping with mockery. "What's the matter, old man? Too good to talk to us?" He jeered, and his friends chuckled. One of them, a stocky boy wearing a backward cap, joined in. "Probably can't hear us." "You need a hearing aid, too," one of the boys teased. The elderly man remained seated, his cane now resting firmly between his knees. His face showed no emotion, no indication that the taunts had broken through his calm demeanor. But his hands, calloused and steady, tightened ever so slightly around the worn wood. He glanced briefly at the floor, as if grounding himself in the present moment. Across the aisle, a young woman shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She shot a wary look at the teenagers, but quickly returned her attention to her phone. A man in a gray suit adjusted his tie and buried his nose deeper into a newspaper, his discomfort obvious. No one wanted to get involved. The boy in the red hoodie smirked at the silence. "Look at him," he said, turning to his friends. "Dude probably thinks he's too good for us. What are you, some kind of king or something?" "Yeah," another boy chimed in. "You gonna knight us with that cane, Grandpa?" The taunts were sharp, their voices filled with the carelessness of youth. They laughed louder, encouraged by the man's silence and the passenger's refusal to intervene. The old man shifted slightly, tilting his head as if lost in a distant memory only he could see. "Say something," Red Hoodie demanded, his tone now tinged with irritation. "Or are you scared?" The bus lurched to a stop at a red light, the sudden jolt silencing the chatter momentarily. The old man finally spoke, his voice low but firm. "Respect is a lesson some people only learn the hard way." The words were simple, but they carried weight, hanging in the air, heavy and undeniable. For a moment the teenagers exchanged glances, unsure of how to respond. But Red Hoodie quickly recovered, masking his unease with bravado. "Oh, so he talks now," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Respect, huh? That's rich coming from someone who's too scared to stand up for himself." The old man turned his head slightly, locking eyes with the boy. "You think strength is loud, don't you?" he said. "You have no idea what strength looks like." The bus fell into a tense silence, every passenger now fully engaged in the unfolding drama. Even the boy's friends seemed unsure, their laughter fading into nervous grins. The light turned green, and the bus jerked forward, its passengers swaying with emotion. Red Hoodie took a step closer to the man, leaning over him with mock intimidation. "Why don't you show us then? Let's see how strong you are." The old man sighed, a long, measured exhale, as if bracing himself for what was to come. His eyes flickered toward the boy, calm, unreadable, and somehow unshakable. It wasn't just the boy who was about to get an education. Everyone on that bus was about to witness something they wouldn't forget. For a moment, the bus seemed to shrink, the tension so thick it pressed on everyone. The elderly man remained still, his cane steady between his hands. His gaze didn't waver, but in the silence that followed, his mind drifted unbidden to another time. 40 years ago. He had been far from Baltimore, standing knee-deep in the humid swamps of Vietnam. The air had been filled with the deafening roar of helicopters and the sharp staccato bursts of gunfire. Every muscle in his body had been taut, every nerve on edge. Survival wasn't a choice, it was instinct. He had been barely more than a boy then, younger than the kids taunting him now. But war had aged him quickly. He remembered the faces of the comrades who had fought by his side, men who had stood with him in the hardest moments. Some were gone now, their memories living on in fragments, like the sound of their laughter during quiet nights in camp or the way they'd share stories of home. He had carried the weight of their loss long after the war ended, their sacrifices etched into his soul. The bus jolted over a pothole, snapping him back to the present. He straightened slightly, his grip tightening on the cane. He wasn't angry. Anger didn't come easily to him anymore. What he felt was something deeper, something more controlled. A responsibility to teach these boys a lesson they clearly hadn't learned yet. Red Hoodie interrupted his thoughts with a sharp, mocking laugh. "What's the matter, Grandpa? Cat got your tongue again?" The man didn't respond. Instead, his eyes flicked over the boy, taking in everything. The posture, the bravado, the false confidence that came with not yet understanding the weight of real challenges. He had seen it before in young soldiers who thought they were invincible until the battlefield taught them otherwise. Across the aisle, an older woman whispered to the man beside her, her eyes nervously flicking toward the unfolding scene. No one spoke up. No one intervened. The silence wasn't fear exactly. It was more like an unspoken agreement to stay uninvolved. The man finally spoke, his voice steady and deliberate. "You remind me of someone I used to know," he said, his tone carrying an edge that made the boy stop mid-laugh. "Oh, yeah?" Red Hoodie replied, trying to sound unfazed. "Who's that, your old war buddy?" The man leaned back slightly, his gaze unwavering. "Number A, young soldier who thought he was untouchable. He learned otherwise." The boy snorted, but his friends were noticeably quieter now, their smirks faltering. "Whatever, man. You're just an old has-been. Nobody cares about your stories." The man's lips curled into the faintest hint of a smile, not amused, but knowing. "Careful, son. Sometimes stories are all that keep you from making the same mistakes." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, even the bus seemed to hum softer. But Red Hoodie wasn't ready to back down. He stepped closer now, just inches from the old man. "You think you're so wise, huh? Why don't you prove it?" The old man's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in preparation. He adjusted his cane, his movements slow and deliberate, like a man who knew exactly what he was doing. The storm brewing inside the old man wasn't born of anger. It was forged by experience. And it was about to show these boys what true strength looked like. The bus rumbled along, its passengers frozen in the tension filling the space. The elderly man slowly rose from his seat, the cane steadying his weight as he stood. He wasn't a large man. Age had whittled away the bulk of his frame, but the way he carried himself made him seem taller, stronger. The boys watched him, their smirks fading as curiosity began to take hold. "You want me to prove something?" the man asked, his voice calm, almost quiet, yet somehow commanding the attention of everyone on board. His eyes locked onto Red Hoodie, unwavering. Red Hoodie chuckled nervously, taking a half step back. "What, you're going to hit me with that cane, old man?" The man's hand brushed the top of the cane, but he didn't lift it. "No," he said simply, "but I will teach you something. Your mouth clearly hasn't learned restraint." The air felt charged, the kind of energy that prickled at the back of your neck. The other passengers watched with wide eyes, some leaning forward, eager not to miss a single word. "Do you think this is strength?" the man continued, gesturing at the boys, posturing, loud words, and trying to embarrass someone in public. "It's not strength, it's fear. Fear that the world will see you for what you really are." The boys' friends shifted uncomfortably, their confidence visibly fading. One of them muttered, "Come on, man. Let's just sit down." But Red Hoodie wasn't ready to let it go. His pride was at stake, and he couldn't back down in front of his friends. "You don't know anything about me, old man," he shot back, though his voice lacked its earlier edge. "I know more than you think," the man replied, his voice still calm, steady. "You see this cane? It's not just a stick, it's a reminder. Every scar, every ache in these old bones comes with a story. Stories of battles fought not with fists, but with courage, discipline, and honor. Things you wouldn't understand because you've never had to earn them." The boy's bravado faltered, his hands clenching into fists, but he didn't move. The old man leaned in slightly, his gaze piercing. "Do you know what it's like to watch your friends die so you can live to carry their memory with you every single day, knowing you owe them more than you can ever repay?" The words hit harder than any punch could have. The boy blinked, his jaw working as if he wanted to say something, but no words came. The bus was silent, except for the rhythmic thrum of its engine. The other passengers were riveted by the scene unfolding before them. "You're lucky, kid," the man continued, his tone softening just slightly. "You don't have to learn these lessons the hard way. But keep going like this, disrespecting people, thinking the world owes you something, and you'll find out soon enough. And when that day comes, you'll wish you'd listened." The boy's face turned red, not from anger, but from shame. He looked away, his shoulders slumping slightly. His friends avoided the old man's gaze, their earlier laughter now a distant memory. The bus driver glanced in the rearview mirror, his brow furrowed, but his hands steady on the wheel. No one else moved. The silence was deafening, filled only by the sound of the bus gliding down the road. The old man straightened, his posture as unyielding as ever. "Now," he said, his voice firm, "take your seat or get off this bus." Red Hoodie hesitated for a moment, then muttered something under his breath before retreating to his seat. His friends followed, their heads bowed, their bravado shattered. The confrontation was over, but the lesson had only just begun. And it wasn't just the boys who had something to reflect on. As the teenagers sank into their seats, the tension on the bus began to ease, though the silence lingered. Passengers exchanged quiet glances, some with approval, others with disbelief. The elderly man remained standing for a moment, his grip on the cane firm but relaxed. His gaze swept across the bus, briefly meeting the eyes of each passenger before he slowly returned to his seat. A middle-aged woman sitting near the front finally broke the silence. "Sir," she said, her voice hesitant but respectful, "that was brave." Her words carried a mix of admiration and guilt, as if she regretted not speaking up sooner. The man turned his head slightly, offering her a small nod. "It wasn't bravery," he replied, "just doing what needed to be done." Behind him, Red Hoodie and his friends were unusually quiet. The boy stared out the window, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. His friends whispered amongst themselves, their voices low and subdued. It was clear they had been shaken, not just by the man's words, but by the realization that their actions had consequences beyond a quick laugh. The bus rolled on, its engine humming softly. A young man near the back, wearing headphones slung around his neck, spoke up. "Vietnam, right?" he asked, his tone tentative but curious. The old man turned slightly, his expression unreadable. "Yes," he said simply. "My grandfather served there," the young man continued. He never talked about it much, but when he did, his voice trailed off and he glanced down at his hands. "Thank you for what you did, for what you gave." The old man's lips curved into a faint smile. "We all gave something," he said, "some of us more than others." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Several passengers nodded quietly, the weight of his statement sinking in. The atmosphere on the bus had shifted entirely. Where there had been tension, now there was reflection, a shared understanding of the gravity of the moment they had just witnessed. One of the boys in the group, the stocky one with the backward cap, cleared his throat awkwardly. "Sir," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, I'm sorry, we shouldn't have said those things." The man turned to look at him, his expression softening slightly. "Apology accepted," he said, "but remember, respect isn't something you give just because someone demands it. It's something you give because it's the right thing to do." The boy nodded quickly, his face flushed red. Red Hoodie didn't say anything, but he shifted uncomfortably, clearly wrestling with his thoughts. The bus slowed as it approached the next stop. The old man glanced out the window, his eyes briefly scanning the familiar street corner. He tapped his cane once on the floor, then rose to his feet before he exited. He turned to face the bus, his voice carrying over the hum of the engine. "Kindness and respect cost you nothing," he said, addressing no one in particular, yet speaking to everyone. "But withholding them can cost you everything." The door hissed open and the man stepped off, his gait steady, his presence lingering long after he was gone. The bus remained silent as it pulled away from the curb, passengers lost in their thoughts. They had witnessed more than just a confrontation. They had witnessed a lesson in dignity, and for some, that lesson would stay with them long after the bus ride ended. As the bus rolled on, the atmosphere remained heavy with contemplation. Conversations that had once filled the space with idle chatter were now whispers or complete silence. For many on that ride, the old man's words echoed louder than any noise they had heard all day. Red Hoodie sat slumped in his seat, his once bold posture deflated. His friends avoided eye contact with each other, their faces a mix of guilt and embarrassment. Across the aisle, the young woman who had earlier stayed silent now stared out the window, her reflection faint in the glass. She had been a bystander like so many others, but now she questioned why she hadn't done more. The middle-aged woman near the front took out her phone but didn't use it. Her fingers brushed over the screen absent-mindedly. The young man in the back, who had spoken about his grandfather, leaned his head back, eyes closed, lost in thought. It wasn't just a moment for the teenagers, it was a wake up call for everyone. The lesson wasn't just about respect for elders, it was about recognizing the weight of someone's journey, the battles they fought, and the strength it takes to walk through life with quiet dignity. As the bus reached its final stop, passengers began filing out, each carrying the moment with them in their own way. The group of teenagers exited together but walked apart, their usual boisterous energy replaced by subdued introspection. Red Hoodie paused at the corner, glancing back at the bus before shoving his hands in his pockets and walking away. For the passengers who remained, the silence spoke volumes. They had witnessed a simple truth delivered with unwavering resolve. Respect isn't earned through fear or intimidation, but through understanding and compassion. To those watching this story, ask yourself, what battles have the people around you fought? How can a single moment of kindness or respect change someone's day or even their life? Remember, every person you meet carries a story you might never know. Treat them with the dignity they deserve. And if you found this story meaningful, don't forget to share it, leave a comment, and subscribe for more stories that remind us of the values that truly matter. Together we can spread these lessons and create a kinder, more compassionate world.